You
"He'd
can't
never
just let them
want
take the
you,"
supplies.
said the
People will
stepsister,
starve.
until the
It
Alpha
is
King
already
took
done.
her as his own.
The watch controls the
Within the
gates now.
palace, corridors twisted like the roots of some ancient tree, shadowed and silent, except for the soft echo of careful footsteps. This was a world where power and fear walked hand in hand, and where the Alpha King, Kale, reigned with a strength that demanded respect and terrified even those who served him. Alara, the youngest of her family and the quietest, moved through the palace halls like a ghost. She carried herself with careful grace, her head bent low as if the world were too bright for her to meet. Her stepsisters often whispered cruel things behind her back, their words sharp and slicing, and though she tried not to hear, they always lingered in her mind. The cruelest words came from Leora, the eldest stepsister, who seemed to find joy in reminding Alara of her supposed insignificance. "He'd never want you," Leora had said just that morning, her eyes gleaming with pride as she watched Alara quietly clear the breakfast dishes. "The Alpha King would never notice someone like you. You are nothing." Alara's hands had trembled, but she said nothing. Words, she had learned, could wound more than swords, and silence could shield her better than any armor. Yet deep inside, a spark of longing flickered, longing for something she dared not name, something beyond the walls of her small, ignored existence. The palace itself seemed alive with whispers. Paintings of ancient kings and queens gazed down from the walls, their eyes following anyone who passed. Torches burned with a dim, flickering flame, casting shadows that moved as if they were watching. And through it all, Kale, the Alpha King, moved with a presence that made even the most confident nobles shrink into themselves. He was tall, his shoulders broad and strong, his dark eyes sharp and piercing. Rumors swirled around him, of curses, of immortality, of a heart so bound in darkness that love could only hurt anyone who dared to approach it. Alara had only glimpsed him from afar, at feasts, when he passed through the halls or standing silently on the balcony overlooking the kingdom. But that evening, fate decided to bring them closer than she had ever imagined. She had been carrying a tray of wine through the west wing when a sudden movement caught her eye. A shadow darted between the columns of the hallway, fast and silent, but it was enough to make her drop the tray. The clatter of glass echoed like a scream in the empty hall. "Careful," a voice called, low and commanding. Alara looked up to see Kale standing at the end of the hall, his eyes narrowed, his presence filling the space like a storm about to break. He moved toward her with surprising swiftness, catching the tray before it fell entirely. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice even but threaded with an intensity that made her heart thud in her chest. "No, I'm fine," she whispered, though her hands shook. She had not expected the Alpha King to speak to her, much less come so close. Kale's gaze softened ever so slightly as he surveyed her. There was something in her, a quiet strength, a hidden courage, that drew him in, something he had not felt in centuries. He placed the tray carefully on a nearby table, his hand brushing hers, and the contact sent a shiver through her body. "You move with caution," he said, almost as if he were thinking aloud. "Like someone used to being unseen." Alara swallowed. I suppose I am." Kale's eyes studied her, sharp and searching. "Unseen does not mean weak." His words struck her like a lightning bolt, unfamiliar and startling. She had never heard anyone speak to her this way, not with such weight and not with such recognition. The tension between them was palpable, a silent current that made the air heavy. Alara wanted to retreat, to hide in the shadowed hallways she knew so well, but something in Kale's gaze held her in place. She felt as if he could see every thought she had ever tried to hide, every fear, every hope. A sudden noise shattered the quiet, a soft, metallic scrape from the corridor behind her. Kale's expression hardened instantly. He moved with impossible speed, stepping in front of her, his hand outstretched as if to shield her. Alara's breath caught in her throat. "Stay close," he commanded, and she did, following him without question as he moved through the twisting hallways. They reached a small, secluded garden, hidden behind high stone walls and overgrown vines. Moonlight spilled over the marble paths, turning the leaves silver. Here, for the first time, Elara felt a fragile sense of safety. Kale turned to her, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Someone was following you," he said, his voice low and steady. "Do you know who?" Elara shook her head, her voice barely audible. "No, I didn't see anyone." He studied her face, and for a moment the mask of the Alpha King slipped. There was a flicker of something raw, almost vulnerable in his gaze. "You have courage," he said softly, "more than I would have expected." Elara's heart beat faster, a mixture of fear and fascination curling in her chest. Courage was a word she had never thought to claim for herself, yet here it was, spoken by the most powerful man in the kingdom. For a long moment they stood in silence, the night surrounding them like a living thing. The air was thick with unspoken words, the quiet tension of two souls brushing against something dangerous and forbidden. Then Kale spoke again, his voice almost a whisper. "Do not let them tell you who you are." Elara's breath caught. His words cut through the years of neglect and ridicule, striking a chord deep within her. She wanted to say something, to tell him that she had tried, that she had always tried, but the words stuck in her throat. Before she could respond, a sudden rustle came from the far end of the garden. Kale's posture stiffened, every muscle coiled like a spring. Elara felt a cold shiver of fear, and instinctively she stepped back behind him. From the shadows, a figure emerged, tall, cloaked, moving with a silent menace. Elara's heart pounded in her chest. Kale's eyes narrowed, and in an instant he moved with the speed of a striking panther, placing himself between her and the intruder. "Elara, stay behind me," he commanded, his voice low and dangerous. The figure paused, then disappeared into the darkness as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only a whisper of danger in its wake. Elara's knees felt weak. Who was that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Kale did not answer immediately. He placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her, and for a moment she felt the warmth of his presence, the strange comfort in being so close to someone so powerful. "Someone who would do you harm," he finally said, his tone dark and measured. "But you are safe now." The words should have brought relief, but Elara felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. She was safe, yes, but safe in the presence of a man who could be both savior and storm. For a brief moment their eyes met, and the air between them seemed to hum. There was a recognition there, something ancient and unspoken, as if their souls had brushed in some past life. Elara wanted to step closer, to reach for something she could not name, but she dared not. The fear of the unknown, of the power before her, kept her rooted in place. Kale seemed to sense her hesitation. "You are stronger than you know," he murmured, "and perhaps stronger than you think you need to be." Elara's chest tightened at his words. She had lived her life in shadows, unnoticed, undervalued, and yet here was someone who saw her. Not as a servant, not as a stepsister, not as someone insignificant, but as something more. Something real. The night stretched around them, heavy with the scent of flowers and the whisper of leaves in the breeze. Kale's presence was overwhelming, his power palpable, yet there was a softness there, fleeting and fragile, that made Elara's heart ache. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible, for reasons she herself did not fully understand. Kale inclined his head slightly, a rare gesture of acknowledgement. "Be careful," he said, stepping back into the shadows. "The palace is not as safe as it seems, and not all dangers are visible." And with that, he was gone, leaving Elara alone in the moonlit garden, her heart racing and her mind swirling with thoughts she could not name. She leaned against the cold stone of the wall, closing her eyes. The fear, the longing, the strange exhilaration, all of it collided inside her. For the first time, she felt a glimmer of possibility, a whisper of a world beyond the life she had always known. But even as she stood there, alone and trembling, a shadow watched from the edge of the garden, unseen and silent. Danger had not left her side, and the events of this night were only the beginning. Alara did not yet know it, but her life, and the life of the Alpha King, were now entwined in ways that would change the kingdom forever. And as the first light of dawn began to touch the horizon, she made a silent promise to herself. She would not remain invisible. She would not be overlooked, and somehow she would find a way to survive the shadows that had only begun to stir. The morning sun had barely touched the towers of Valerian when Alara awoke, still trembling from the events of the night before. The garden, the shadows, and the Alpha King's piercing gaze replayed in her mind like a dream she could not fully hold. Her chest ached with a strange mixture of fear and longing. She had never imagined that one encounter could leave such an imprint on her soul. Yet the palace did not forgive weakness. From the moment she stepped into the main hall, she felt the weight of the court's eyes upon her. Servants whispered behind her back, stepsisters giggled cruelly, and nobles glanced with curiosity, wondering why the Alpha King had seemed so distracted the night before. Leora, as expected, wasted no time. Her voice, sweet but edged with venom, cut through the hall. "Alara, did you spend the night wandering again? The palace is not safe for someone so fragile." Alara lowered her gaze but refused to retreat. Something inside her, some ember of courage, refused to bend to Leora's mockery. She whispered only to herself, "I am not fragile." Not anymore. The whisper barely left her lips when a sudden presence filled the room. Kale stepped into the hall, and immediately the murmurs died. He moved like a shadow of authority, and the courtiers instinctively parted. His eyes scanned the crowd until they found Alara S., and for a brief moment the world seemed to hold its breath. "Alara," he said, his voice commanding yet calm, "you will serve closer to me from this day forward. You are to attend the Alpha King in the chambers, learn the ways of the court, and observe the affairs that shape this kingdom." A hush fell over the hall. To serve the Alpha King directly was a privilege that many longed for but few received. Yet with it came danger, responsibility, and scrutiny beyond imagining. Alara felt her heart race. The honor was overwhelming, but so was the fear. I will serve as you command, Your Majesty," she said, bowing deeply. Kale's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than was polite. "Do not disappoint me," he said simply, and turned, leaving the hall echoing with silent tension. The following days were a test unlike any Alara had faced. She shadowed Kale through the palace halls, listening to whispers of war and magic, learning the ways of diplomacy, and observing the dangerous undercurrents of the court. Every moment spent near him was charged with an invisible current, a tension neither dared to name aloud. Kale himself was a study in contradictions. In public, he was the Alpha King, commanding, cold, and unyielding. But in quieter moments, when no one else watched, he revealed glimpses of vulnerability. He seemed to trust Alara in ways he did not trust anyone else. And she, for her part, was fascinated. Her fear of him mingled with a growing admiration and even something dangerously close to longing. But the court was never silent for long. Leora, her stepsister, had begun weaving her own web. She had overheard fragments of conversations, glimpsed Alara's closeness to the king, and her jealousy burned like fire. Leora sought allies among the courtiers, spreading rumors that Alara was ambitious, deceitful, and undeserving of Kale's attention. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the palace in shades of gold and crimson, Alara overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "They say she is clever, yes," a noble whispered, "but clever can be dangerous. I would not trust her with the Alpha King's confidence." "She is just a child," another replied. "Kale may see her, but he does not yet understand the danger she brings. Someone will have to remind him." Alara's hands tightened into fists. Every word, every whisper was a reminder of the fragility of her position. But deep within, a defiance stirred. She would not be cast aside. She would not be invisible. Kale, ever perceptive, noticed her tension that evening. As they walked through the private chambers, he spoke, low and deliberate. "You are aware of the whispers, aren't you?" Alara hesitated, then nodded. I hear them." His eyes, sharp and commanding, softened just slightly. "Let them speak. Whispers are only words, and words cannot bind you unless you allow them to." Alara looked at him, studying the lines of his face, the shadow in his eyes, the quiet strength in his posture. "And if they try to harm me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kale's expression darkened, and the air seemed to thrum with his presence. "Then I will ensure they cannot," he said, and for a moment Alara saw the full weight of the Alpha King, the power, the danger, and the promise of protection that was absolute. Despite his words, danger was never far. One night, while walking through a moonlit corridor, Alara noticed a faint glow beneath the tapestries. Her curiosity, mingled with caution, led her closer. Behind the heavy fabric, a small vial of shimmering liquid lay hidden, marked with strange symbols she did not recognize. Before she could react, a hand fell on her shoulder and she jumped. Kale's eyes were on her, piercing and unyielding. "Curiosity can be dangerous," he said quietly. "What have you found?" Alara held up the vial. I don't know, it was hidden." Kale examined it carefully. His face was unreadable, but a shadow crossed his expression. "This is forbidden magic. Someone is trying to manipulate events within the palace." Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. Why would someone want to harm you?" He looked at her, and for the first time he spoke of the curse that bound him. "Because I am not easily controlled. Those who seek power fear me, and those who desire it will try to bend anyone close to me." The revelation struck her like a cold wind. The Alpha King, the man whose presence had terrified her and fascinated her in equal measure, was bound by a force darker than anyone could imagine. And yet, here she was, standing beside him, trusted enough to see a glimpse of his truth. Days turned into weeks, and Alara's role grew ever more complex. She learned the delicate balance of power in the court, the secrets that moved like shadows through the halls, and the unspoken rules that kept the kingdom alive. Kale continued to observe her, testing her courage, her intelligence, and her loyalty. Every shared glance, every quiet word, carried a weight that neither dared to name. One night, Kale summoned her to the private chambers overlooking the palace gardens. The moon hung low, silver and serene, casting the flowers and fountains in an ethereal glow. Alara's heart raced as she approached, unsure of what he might say. "Do you understand the danger you face standing near me?" he asked, his voice soft but edged with steel. "Yes," she replied, meeting his gaze. "I understand, and yet I do not fear it." Kale studied her as if measuring the depth of her courage. Then he spoke, words heavy with meaning. "Courage is admirable, but it can also be reckless. There are forces in this palace that will test you, and they will not forgive weakness." Alara nodded, her chest tight. She had known fear her whole life, but now, standing here with him, she understood that fear was not the enemy. It was the shadow that sharpened her senses, that reminded her of what was at stake. As they stood together in silence, the air between them thick with unspoken emotion, a rustle came from the edge of the garden. Kale tensed instantly, and Alara instinctively moved closer to him. The shadows shifted and she saw a figure slipping away into the darkness. "Someone watches us," Kale said quietly, "and their intent is not benign." Alara's heart pounded. She felt a strange thrill of fear, tempered by the safety of his presence. It was a dangerous combination, one that left her breathless and trembling. Kale turned to her, his expression unreadable but his voice softening. "You must be careful. Trust is earned slowly here, and even loyalty can be a weapon." Alara nodded, understanding the weight of his words. She was learning, slowly, the delicate dance of power, desire, and survival in a palace that was as beautiful as it was dangerous. And yet, even as she stood there, mesmerized by his presence, she could not shake the feeling that the night held more than whispers and shadows. There was a force moving unseen, testing the bonds between them, and the danger had only just begun. The palace of Valerian never truly slept. Its walls held secrets like shadows held whispers, and every hallway seemed to breathe with the memory of power and betrayal. Since the events in the garden, Alara's life had become a delicate balance between duty, fear, and the strange, overwhelming pull she felt toward the Alpha King, Kale. Her stepsisters, particularly Leora, had grown bolder. The whispers that once lingered behind closed doors now took shape in small, dangerous actions. Hidden traps of mischief, minor sabotage, and subtle schemes began to shadow Alara's days. Leora's envy was a living thing, one that sought to undo every moment of happiness Alara might have dared to dream of. But Alara had changed. She moved through the palace with a quiet confidence now, her eyes sharp, her mind alert. No longer invisible, she had begun to understand the dangerous dance of power that Kale navigated daily. She learned to anticipate, to listen, and to act when necessary. And in her, a spark had begun to grow, a spark Kale had noticed long before she admitted it to herself. Kale, for his part, was a storm contained. His eyes, dark and endless, often sought her out in the hallways, searching for meaning in her courage. He had grown accustomed to her presence, and yet he could not fully trust himself around her. His curse, one older than the stones of the palace, fed on despair and longing. To feel love without caution was to risk destruction, for both him and anyone foolish enough to care for him. It was during a late evening in the library, surrounded by towering shelves of ancient tomes and whispered secrets, that the tension between them reached a dangerous edge. Alara was cataloging scrolls of ancient magic when Kale entered, moving silently as always. The candlelight cast flickering shadows across his face, and Alara felt her heart tighten in a mix of fear and fascination. "You continue to spend too many hours alone," Kale said, his voice calm but heavy with authority. "It is admirable but also reckless." Alara straightened, brushing her hair back. "I must understand the kingdom, Your Majesty. Knowledge is the only way I can serve you properly." Kale stepped closer, the space between them charged with an unspoken electricity. "And yet knowledge will not always protect you from the dangers that lurk here," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "There are those who would harm you, and I cannot always be there to stop them." Alara felt a shiver run through her. The fear was sharp, yes, but beneath it lay something warmer, an undeniable connection, a tether between them neither fully understood nor could ignore. I will be careful," she whispered. "I promise." Kale's gaze softened for a fleeting moment. "Courage is not merely the absence of fear, Alara," he said. "It is the ability to move forward even when fear is present. Do you understand?" She nodded, though her chest throbbed with unspoken emotion. She did understand. And yet understanding did not make the danger, or the longing, any easier to bear. The next day, the palace erupted with sudden chaos. A magical disturbance had been detected near the western walls, the kind of dark energy Kale had warned about. Alara, despite the fear twisting in her stomach, followed him to the battlements, where the wind tore at her hair and the clouds rolled like living shadows across the sky. Leora had made her move. Hidden in the shadows was a fragment of forbidden magic, one designed to weaken Kale and draw him into vulnerability. It was a dangerous gamble, and its consequences would ripple across the kingdom. Kale's eyes narrowed as he detected the spell, and he moved with unerring precision to intercept it. "Step back, Alara," he commanded, his voice sharp and protective. "This is not a game. This is real danger." Alara hesitated. Her instinct screamed to flee, yet a deeper part of her urged her forward. She could not stand aside while the man she had come to trust, perhaps even care for, faced harm. She took a careful step closer, her hands trembling, and Kale's eyes softened just enough for her to see the raw intensity beneath his control. The spell struck the battlements with a flash of dark light, but Kale deflected it with a forceful sweep of his hand, the air shimmering with energy. The wind roared, carrying the scent of rain and ozone, and for a brief moment the world seemed suspended. "Alara," Kale said, his voice low and dangerous, "do not move." And yet she could not. Driven by courage and a fierce determination, she reached out, taking the fragment of magic into her hands. The darkness resisted, pulling at her strength, testing her will, but she held firm. Kale's eyes widened in shock and admiration. "Good, hold it," he commanded. Together they redirected the magic, sending it harmlessly into the night sky. The spell disintegrated, leaving only the echo of power lingering in the wind. For a moment they stood side by side, hearts pounding, breaths heavy. Kale looked at her, the weight of centuries pressing in his gaze, and said softly, "You risked yourself for me. Do you understand what that means?" Alara's throat tightened. I care for you," she whispered. The words felt like a confession and a challenge, and yet they were true. She had tried to deny it, to ignore the impossible pull between them, but now she could no longer hide it. Kale's expression faltered. His hands, which had always been steady and commanding, twitched slightly, as if the admission had unsettled the very foundation of his control. He had not expected this. He had not expected a human heart to dare to step so close to his own, and now the curse that bound him stirred, sensing danger and desire in equal measure. Before either could speak again, a sudden noise came from the shadows, a sharp cry, followed by silence. Leora had returned, more dangerous than ever, her eyes burning with jealousy and malice. "You think you are brave," she sneered, stepping into the moonlight. "You are nothing but a servant playing at importance. He will never truly want you." Alara's hands clenched, but Kale moved between them, his presence a living wall of power and authority. "Enough, Leora," he said, voice low and cold. "Your envy has no place here." Leora laughed, a harsh, cruel sound. "You cannot protect her forever. One mistake and she will fall, and then we will see if the Alpha King still looks at her with such fondness." Kale's eyes flashed, and the air between them seemed to hum with tension. "This ends now," he said, voice sharp enough to cut stone. The shadows around Leora seemed to shrink under his gaze. Alara stepped forward, surprising herself with the courage that surged through her. "I am not afraid," she said firmly, looking directly at her stepsister, "and I will not be controlled by your jealousy or fear. I choose to stand here, and I will not retreat." The words hung in the night air like a spell of their own. Kale looked at her, a mixture of awe and something deeper, more vulnerable in his eyes. For the first time, she felt that she and the Alpha King were not just bound by circumstance. They were bound by choice, by courage, and by the strange, electric pull that neither could deny. That night, as the palace settled into uneasy silence, Kale and Alara stood together on the battlements, gazing at the stars. The kingdom stretched before them, silent and infinite, and for a fleeting moment, the danger, the jealousy, and the shadows felt distant. "Alara," Kale said softly, "you are unlike anyone I have ever known, brave, clever, and dangerous in ways you cannot yet imagine." Alara's heart skipped a beat. "Dangerous?" she asked, surprised. "Yes," he said, his voice low and steady. "Because you touch me in ways no one else has. Because you make me want things I thought I had long abandoned." The words struck her with the force of truth. She had felt it too, the pull, the longing, the strange exhilaration that came from standing close to someone so powerful, so dangerous, and yet so alive. But their moment was interrupted. A faint shimmer of movement appeared at the far end of the battlements, a presence that was neither fully shadow nor fully human. Kale's eyes narrowed, and he reached for her hand, pulling her behind him. "Alara," he whispered, tension sharpening his features. "You must be ready." The stepsister's envy has become more than words. It is a force, and it will not rest until it tests everything we have begun to build. Alara felt a chill run through her, a mix of fear and excitement, as she clutched his hand. She realized then that she was no longer the timid, invisible girl she had once been. She was a part of something larger, something dangerous and beautiful, and she would face it with courage, heart, and an unyielding will. Together they stared into the shadows, the wind whipping around them, the night alive with threat and possibility. And in that moment, a silent promise passed between them. They would stand together, whatever darkness came, and they would not falter. The night had grown heavy over Valerian, as if the kingdom itself held its breath. The battlements, slick with rain, glimmered under the silver light of the full moon. The air was thick with tension and the faint hum of ancient magic, the kind that whispered of curses and long-forgotten power. Alara's hands trembled slightly as she gripped Kale's. The darkness ahead was alive, pulsing with the energy of Leora's forbidden magic. She could see her stepsister's eyes glowing with malice, and the shadows behind her moved with a life of their own, hints of the unnatural forces she had dared to summon. Kale's presence was steady beside her, a pillar of strength and control. His dark eyes, full of storm and intensity, never left Alara. "Stay close," he commanded, his voice low but firm. "Whatever happens, we face this together." Alara nodded. Fear and courage battled in her chest, but the decision had been made. She would stand by him. She would not run, and she would not let the darkness win. Leora stepped forward, her voice sharp and cutting like a whip. "You think you are powerful, Kale. But even the Alpha King can fall when the right magic is used, and you, little Alara, will see your courage turn to ash." Alara swallowed, but she did not back down. "You are wrong," she said, voice steady. "I am not afraid, and your magic cannot break what is true between us." Kale's eyes softened for a fleeting moment at her words. He reached out, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. "You are braver than anyone I have ever known," he murmured, "and stronger than you believe." The shadowy energy Leora wielded surged forward like a living wave, crashing toward them. Kale stepped forward to shield Alara, his hands glowing faintly with the protective magic of his curse. Yet even his power strained under the force of Leora's spell. "Alara," Kale shouted, gripping her hand. "Now you must act." Alara's mind raced. In the days leading up to this moment, she had discovered an ancient prophecy hidden among the library's scrolls. It spoke of a way to break the curse that bound Kale, a way that required courage, sacrifice, and unwavering trust. The instructions were cryptic, but she knew instinctively what needed to be done. She raised her hands, palms glowing with the faint, golden light of the spell she had prepared. It was a light born not of magic alone, but of intent, of love and courage intertwined. The shadows recoiled, hissing, and Leora's eyes widened in shock. "Impossible," Leora spat. "No human can wield such power." "You underestimate her," Kale said, his voice a mix of awe and pride. "She is no ordinary human." Alara focused all her will, her heart pounding in rhythm with the kingdom's pulse. She imagined the bond she shared with Kale, the trust, the fear, the longing, and the courage that had grown between them. She let that energy flow through her hands, shaping the light into a shield that met the dark magic head-on. The clash was like a storm unleashed. Light and shadow collided in a brilliant explosion, illuminating the battlements, the rain, and the palace beyond. Alara felt the darkness pull at her very soul, whispering fears, doubts, and memories of failure. But Kale's hand held hers, steady and warm, a tether grounding her. "Do not falter," he urged. "We can end this together." Her vision blurred with effort, but she pushed forward. The light she wielded expanded, surrounding Leora and the shadows, pressing against the darkness with the weight of truth and courage. The forbidden magic screamed, twisting and writhing, but it could not break the bond between them. And then, with a final surge, the light exploded outward. Leora screamed, the shadows dissipated, and the spell that had threatened them vanished like mist at dawn. The battlements were silent except for the sound of rain and the ragged breaths of the two standing in the aftermath. Kale lowered his hands, and for the first time in centuries, he felt the curse loosen its grip. The weight that had pressed on his heart, the darkness that had kept him isolated, seemed to lift. He looked at Alara, and in that moment there was no fear, no danger, only connection, trust, and the fragile, luminous thread of love that had brought them through. Alara dropped to her knees, exhausted but alive. Kale knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You have saved more than me tonight," he said softly. "You have saved yourself and perhaps even the kingdom." Tears streamed down her face, mingling with the rain. I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered. Kale's gaze was tender, a rare softness in the eyes of a king who had seen centuries pass. "No," he said. "We did this together, and now perhaps we can finally live rather than merely survive." The castle began to settle into calm. The wind softened, the rain eased, and the first hints of dawn painted the horizon in gold and rose. The danger had passed, but the memory of it remained, a reminder that darkness would always linger. Yet in that moment, Alara and Kale knew that their courage, their trust, and their bond could withstand anything. The stepsister, Leora, had vanished during the final clash, her magic scattered and broken. Rumors would later speak of her exile, of her banishment from the kingdom, though none truly knew where she had gone. What mattered was that the threat she posed had ended, and the balance of power within Valerian had shifted irreversibly. Kale and Alara stood together atop the palace towers, the wind whipping their hair, the kingdom stretching endlessly before them. For a long moment they said nothing, simply feeling the presence of each other, the silence heavy with all that had passed. Finally Kale spoke, his voice low and gentle. "Alara, I have spent centuries in solitude, bound by this curse, thinking I could never touch love without destroying it. But you have shown me that it is possible, that love can be strength, not weakness." Alara's hands reached for his, intertwining with his fingers. "I never feared you," she said softly. "I feared what might happen if we let ourselves care, but now I know. We can face anything together." A breeze swept over the towers, carrying the scent of rain-soaked flowers and the first light of morning. In that wind there was freedom, release, and hope. Kale lowered his forehead to hers, the world shrinking to the space between them. "Then let us begin again," he whispered. "Not as king and servant, not as ruler and subject, but as two souls who have chosen each other." Alara smiled, a mixture of relief, joy, and wonder. "Together," she agreed. And in that moment the curse that had bound Kale for centuries dissolved completely. The darkness that had stalked the palace, the shadows that had threatened to consume them, and the chains of fear and isolation were gone. All that remained was the quiet, radiant bond of two hearts that had survived fire, magic, and envy, and emerged stronger for it. The palace slowly came to life again. Courtiers whispered of the strange events, of the bravery of the girl who had faced forbidden magic, and of the Alpha King who had finally found someone who could stand beside him without fear. The kingdom had changed, as had its ruler. But change, they all sensed, was not always unwelcome. Alara and Kale spent the days that followed learning the rhythms of their bond. They walked together through the gardens, discussed matters of the kingdom, and shared quiet moments atop the towers. The tension that had once crackled between them had shifted into something steady, something deep and enduring. And yet, the kingdom of Valerian, with its shadows and mysteries, reminded them always that vigilance was necessary. Magic lingered, envy lingered, and the past was never entirely silent. But together, they had discovered a truth stronger than any curse or shadow, that trust, courage, and love could conquer even the deepest darkness. In time, the palace, once a place of fear and whispers, became a symbol of hope. Ilara, once overlooked and underestimated, became known as the heart of Valerian, a symbol of courage and wisdom. And Kale, freed from the curse that had defined him for centuries, ruled not as a tyrant or a solitary figure, but as a king who had learned the power of trust, love, and redemption. On the highest tower under the first light of dawn, they stood together. The wind carried whispers of the past, of trials overcome and of the kingdom's future. And in the quiet between heartbeats, Kale spoke again. No curse, no shadow, no fear can touch us now, because together we are stronger than any darkness. Alara rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the warmth and strength that had carried them through. Together, she agreed, smiling as the sun bathed the kingdom in golden light. The shadows of the past had faded, and in their place rose a love that would endure through centuries, a love born in fear, tempered by courage, and finally, redeemed in the light. End of Part 4/series conclusion. The kingdom of Valerian had survived the night of shadows, jealousy, and forbidden magic. The Alpha King and the once overlooked girl stood side by side, bound not by duty, but by choice and trust. Danger had tested them, fear had tried to break them, yet through courage, sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty, they emerged victorious. The wind whispered across the towers, carrying the story of love, bravery, and redemption to every corner of the kingdom. And somewhere in the distance, the first rays of a new dawn promised that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together, stronger, united, and unafraid.